Uh-oh. Okay, we'll start with this. The continued fallout of today's announcement that Jake Paul will be fighting Gervonta Davis on Netflix. A friend of the channel that goes by the name Boxeo Pats.
We served together on the Royal Marines.
Boxeo said, so PBC and Amazon have no Tank or Benavidez for the rest of this year. Old men, Manny and Thurman, will have to save the day then, I guess. If you're a PBC fan, you don't have that much to look forward to in terms of the fall and winter months. The proposed Fundora versus Thurman fight, Manny Pacquiao's return. Manny wanted to fight Gervonta, though. I guess he's not going to get that chance, at least not this year. Maybe next year, if the PBC is still around, if they're still a thing. Another friend of the channel, Quentin D. Lilly, said, this highlights a bigger issue I noticed, and IQ News brought it up back in 2020. The PBC never invested in young fighters when they were on top of the game in the United States, while promotional companies like Golden Boy Promotions, Matchroom, Queensberry Promotions, and Top Rank did. Fast forward to 2025, and they only have 3 or 4 headliners. I think 3 or 4 is being generous. You can stick almost anybody in a main event, but that doesn't make them a main event fighter. I would say what headliners they have, or they had, maybe David Benavidez, maybe Gervonta. And you will notice that there was no aversion from Amazon as a platform to Gervonta boxing off platform or David Benavidez boxing off platform, likely because those fighters are not a big part of their bottom line. They're not a blip on their radar. The PBC has had year and a half to deliver something to the Amazon platform that might convince them to make a more long-term investment. They've had a year and a half, they've done shows, and so far, all you're seeing is boxers that normally box on PBC shows boxing off platform. David Benavidez, David Morrell, now Gervonta Davis. 2 of these guys are their flagship fighters. The biggest part of their bottom line. It looks a lot like the PBC can no longer afford to accommodate them, thus, they have to go elsewhere. David Benavidez certainly does. Now campaigning as a light heavyweight, the PBC simply don't have the bodies to provide him or the money to bring fighters to him. Gervonta Davis could have had a halfway decent rematch with Lamont Roach that would have done fairly well at the box office, but he has elected to do this. He's elected to cross the street and box Jake Paul at the expense of his dignity. Not that I think he ever had any. I don't think he did. It would definitely be a game changer for the PBC if they could parlay this engagement into a Netflix broadcast deal. A long-term commitment, essentially. That would be a Hail Mary save for them, but they simply don't have the bodies. Moreover, they don't have the track record. You've been on NBC, you've been on Fox, you've been on Showtime. You didn't deliver metrics to them, and you by yourself, you don't have the depth in your stable. Going back to what Quentin highlighted, that I highlighted 5 years ago in 2020, they haven't signed very many, if any, new fighters, new blood, a new generation to carry the PBC banner into the next era of boxing. Now, Top Rank, they're still signing fighters, even now when they're between broadcasters. So is Matchroom, so is Queensberry. They already have their next wave lined up, but the PBC, they're still trying to sell you Pacquiao fights and Thurman fights. They're still trying to sell you the Chalo brothers. So this is an aging and thinning stable that simply doesn't have the depth for a big-time broadcaster to invest in them. They don't have the bodies, they don't have the brands, They don't have the know-how, because if they did, they wouldn't have been kicked off of as many broadcast networks as they have.
The other thing.
I don't know how much longer you're gonna have Gervonta Davis. That is, after this Jake Paul fight, I don't know how much longer he's going to box, but he started off this year saying he wants this to be his last year in the sport. With all the money that he makes from the Jake Paul fight, do you think he's gonna come back to regular boxing, to box in regular fights for regular money?
After the Jake Paul fight, what do you think? He's gonna boil down to 135, try to settle up with Lamont Roach?
Shakur Stevenson, you think he's gonna drop down to 140 to fight Keyshawn Davis or Teofimo or anybody that's down there for the money that pays? Do you expect Gervonta Davis to do it?
I don't.
And you don't either.
The point I'm making, after this Jake Paul fight, and whatever they're paying Gervonta to have it, he might walk away, he might retire, and the PBC may not have him to use anymore.
Back over to David. The biggest fights for David are fights that the PBC can't provide him. They don't have the bodies, they don't have the money. His best bet to be in meaningful fights and make significant money is to try his best to win the yard fight and parlay that into either a better beef fight or a b-vol fight. Turkey will pay you to fight them. Turkey will, but the PBC, they're shit out of luck.
They're gonna try to stage Manny Pacquiao's return, if he does mean to return, and they're gonna bill that as a pay-per-view at a time where everybody's moving away from that model. Boxing's moving away from it, MMA is moving away from it.
And they're gonna do that with Fundora versus Thurman too. They're gonna try to bill that as a pay-per-view. Who do you expect to buy it?
Nobody.
PBC seem to be going out gradually with a whimper, little by little. May take a while for them to be completely gone. Not dissimilar from what we see in main events. Main events used to have it good on HBO, back when HBO was in boxing. But little by little, their presence in the sport stopped being felt to the point where they're just booking agents now.
No broadcast deal. They can't afford to do their own shows, their own promotions. That could happen to the PBC. How much longer do you think Amazon is going to stay?
Hypothetically speaking, if at the end of this year, the deal is done and it's over, where does the PBC go? What do they even have to bring over? Gary Russell?
Brandon Figueroa? Isaac Cruz?
Saw resident bootlicker Ellie Sucksack say Tank hasn't said one word and is trending. He likely hasn't said one word because he doesn't want to have to answer questions about the Lamont Roach rematch. What happened to that?
But at some point, he's going to have to face the music. At some point in the build-up of the Jake Paul exhibition, he's going to be in front of the cameras, and I think somebody will muster up the courage to ask him, what happened with Lamont?
Ellie Sucksack continued, since this morning, I've gotten hundreds and hundreds of messages from people reaching out to me about Tank versus Jake Paul. Is it real? Entertainers, athletes, fans, huge response. I've not seen anything like this since Mayweather versus McGregor.
I wouldn't take it from him. He's a spin doctor, and he's running interference for Gervonta Davis, trying his best to frame this as a flex. A win.
But it doesn't seem like a win for the PBC, from their perspective. All your flagship fighters are boxing off platform. This doesn't incentivize Amazon to do more business with you. Remember a year or so ago when Gervonta Davis said, like I said before, I have a 6 or 7 fight deal, and that little bitch-ass house kid from Newark is in it. He was talking about Shakur Stevenson, but what happened to the 6 or 7 fights? What happened to that? To be a Gervonta Davis fan, I'm convinced you can't be a fan of boxing and a fan of Gervonta. They don't hold him to any kind of standard. These are his words.
Shakur didn't go anywhere. He's still there. In the same division where you hold the title.
And do you think Gervonta Davis's fans are going to bring up this tweet to him? Do you think they're going to hold his feet to the fire and pressure him to fight a boxer, a real boxer, not a novelty act, in Jake Paul? I see them and they're acting like they've won something.
You can't be a fan of Gervonta and be a fan of boxing. The two don't go together. One really ain't got nothing to do with the other.
Veteran boxing scribe Chava ESPN stated the WBA is about to analyze Gervonta Davis's status as lightweight champion after announcing an exhibition with Jake Paul. The rematch against Lamont Roach had been ordered following their controversial draw. Should they strip him of the belt? Could they make room for an interim title?
What would be the ideal thing to do in this situation?
Ideally, they would strip Gervonta Davis. They would take the title from him knowing that it's highly unlikely that he returns to the lightweight division after the exhibition with Jake Paul. Now, I don't think that Gervonta's about to walk in at 190 pounds, not standing in at 5'5", but you gotta figure he's gonna walk in 154, 160, maybe a little heavier than that, to where him coming back to lightweight is highly unlikely.
Ideally, they would strip him because he's not likely to return to the division and because he's not complying with their order. They ordered him to fight Lamont.
But if they did strip him, who would the belt go to when Lamont Roach's name does not appear in their rank standings? There is not a secondary WBA champion at lightweight right now, and ranked at number 1 is Floyd Schofield. Ranked at number 2 is Andy Cruz. If you strip Gervonta Davis of the title, I guess it would have to be fought for by those two, by Floyd Schofield and Andy Cruz.
Well, that's not a bad thing. Gervonta Davis won't hold the title hostage anymore, and it'll be back in circulation for other fighters to fight for it.
Separate scenario. Now that Lamont isn't on the hook for a Gervonta Davis rematch, he can go straight into a fight with Shakur Stevenson, so that if he does, why don't the WBA let them fight for the title? They did something similar years ago with Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko ahead of what was their fight. They decided to let them fight for the newly vacated title.
After Fury retired the first time.
Do that with Shakur and Lamont. If they fight, of course, all of this would rely on the WBA doing this in a timely fashion, and they don't have the reputation for doing that. Look at how long they let Leo Santa Cruz reign as WBA champion, having not fought at his weight for a very long time. Took a long time before they took the title from him.
One way or another, he's not coming back to 135. Of that, I'm sure of.
And there is very little that the WBA can do about that. Maybe they'd like for him to keep their belt.
Maybe they'd prefer it, but Gervonta Davis himself has never really cared about belts, even though he always kept one around.
Kept one around to maintain the illusion that he was just as good as the other champions at the weight, if not better. The best in show. That's been the marketing angle, whereas now he may have reached a point to where he doesn't need a belt anymore. What do you need a belt for a Jake Paul fight for?
A lightweight title. Are you fighting Jake Paul at lightweight?
WBA's got to figure, as big as this event is, they're not going to see any money from it because their title's not on the line, so they can't collect any sanctioning fees for it.
They don't make anything out of letting Gervonta keep that belt.
It doesn't benefit them in the least bit to drag this out longer and allow Gervonta Davis to hold that belt for longer. It's in their best interests to strip him. The sooner they give it to somebody else, the sooner they can start collecting sanctioning fees from someone else.
I knew he wasn't going to fight Lamont Roach. And I'm telling you now, I know with some certainty, after this Jake Paul fight, he is not going to boil back down to 135. I'd be surprised if he boxes at all.
If he continues to box at all after this exhibition. But if he does, I can almost guarantee it won't be at lightweight.
Won't be at 135 pounds. He's done there, and there's virtually nothing to keep him at that weight.
No incentive to put his body through the rigors of a camp just to get down there. Get down there for what? At the very most, it's a question of when. When will they strip him? How long will it take them? Because I feel like he's going to put them in a position where they have to. They have to eventually. He's not coming back down to lightweight. And all these things that are happening, so many PBC fighters jumping ship and popping up elsewhere, titles that may soon go vacant. It's good for the sport because the PBC has been
an obstruction. They're obstruction artists. How many fights did they get in the way of? How many titles have they held hostage and are still holding hostage to where if they're gone, it's not as log-jammed? The titles are back in circulation.
They've been a nuisance. So if we've now reached a point where they don't have as much money, they don't have as much influence, as many fight dates, their presence isn't felt the same way it was before, things can go back to normal, and boxing can go back to being about boxing.
Addressing a different issue, Ryan Garcia, reacting to this story, said, "This just proves that the new blueprint is get popular, be a decent fighter, pick fights to win that give you an advantage, and continue to rake in the money. Integrity of the sport is getting ruined every day. If you are an up-and-coming fighter, I'd just be focused strictly on building who you are."
This from Brian Garcia. And I happen to agree with everything he said, but given who it's coming from...
It's just another American boxer throwing stones in a glass house.
What I mean by that, it was Ryan Garcia. This same Ryan Garcia last year saying, I want to fight Jake Paul for fun, even though he my burfer.
The hell is a burfer?
Ryan continued, okay, enough. It's on. I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to end this Jake Paul boxing thing. Bring it on, Jake. I'm dead serious. Fuck you. Hit my team up.
This was at the beginning of last year, in March or February, I think it was. It seems that Ryan was just as willing to do the dance with Jake as Gervonta is, so that the next year you can sit on a high horse, wagging your finger at them, and what's wrong with boxing? One can interpret all of this as just jealousy, plain old jealousy, that Gervonta got to fight with Jake, and you didn't. Now,
listen,
what Ryan said was true.
His overview, his reaction to Gervonta Davis versus Jake Paul was spot on, but coming from him, that makes him little more than just a hypocrite. To be honest, for the same money that Gervonta Davis now stands to make from the Jake Paul fight, if you offered that to Ryan, he would do it too. A lot of people would. So let's just can the altruism. This ongoing problem, seems to be a uniquely American problem because it's business as usual in the Japanese boxing scene and the British boxing scene, the Mexican one.
We don't have an overabundance of British fighters setting up novelty fights with the likes of Stephen Fry.
Circus fights with Piers Morgan. The overabundance of these circus acts is primarily based out of America, making this a uniquely American problem. But what's the problem?
A lack of morale. A lack of morale and drive in the American boxer.
The American boxer, the young American boxer, I should say, that just doesn't want to work hard and doesn't want to work at it. That's what we saw with Jared Anderson. That's what we've been seeing from Ryan Garcia, who never even wanted to become a world champion, never wanted to fight for an alphabet title. Gervonta Davis never wanted to be great. In spite of how much his fans put him on a pedestal and how much the media talked him up, he himself never wanted to prove it. Didn't want to prove it with Vasyl Lomachenko, with Teofimo, with Devin, with Shakur.
No morale, no spirit. If there is a problem to be addressed here among the young American boxers the country's producing, it's they ain't got no spirit. No fighting spirit.
Ain't got no heart. Maybe that speaks to something deeper. Maybe there's a deeper social commentary there as to what's going on with America's youth, that they don't want to work at anything. Their values, if they even have any, are completely different from mine and yours when we were young men, and what young men in this era aspire to.
They don't aspire to anything. They don't want to be great. And that's what you're seeing. How could Gervonta Davis be so comfortable doing something like this in front of everybody?
Because he was never trying to be great to begin with.
He was always this way.